And there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to INE's Bootcamp series, GitHub for Everyone. My name is Brooke Seahorn, and this is actually going to be a really cool. I know you've always heard people say, I couldn't be more excited. And you think, yeah, whatever. This is actually going to be very cool. In this particular series, what we're going to do is we're going to be diving into GitHub, looking at some of the features. And the main thing I want you to remember about this is it's GitHub for everyone. One of the things that a lot of people miss out on GitHub is it's not just for developers. It's not just for infrastructure people. You can use it in so many different ways. It's really creative, but the problem is most of us don't or are not even aware of the technical capabilities that are there. So with that said, again, hi, my name is Brooke Seahorn. First of all, welcome to everyone who's showing up. I'm seeing several people, Aziz, Barron, Matt, Varin, hey everybody. Keith, hey man, Keith Bogart, the amazing instructor we have here at INE, is also going to be sitting in the attendees room. There's actually a lot of people from inside INE who are going to be watching this because GitHub is just such a powerful tool that we want to let everyone, even the folks working in an INE, know about it. Now, for a little bit of a switch up here, there's something I need to tell you. A little bit of a bait and switch. I'm not the instructor. Remember at INE, we're all about experts making experts. And even though I'm learning a lot about GitHub, I think what I'm learning more and more is that I've been doing some things wrong. And the person I've been learning from is the person who is going to be leading this. And in fact, came to INE from GitHub. And I'd like to introduce him now, Mr. Matt Davis. Hey, Matt, jump in, man.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up. This should be an absolute blast. Great segue, Brooks. Couldn't appreciate you more. Let's jump in and talk about you and I real quick before we get started. As Brooks spilled the beans a little bit prior to INE, I did kind of do a little time over at GitHub, and it was an absolute blast. And one of the best things that I learned while I was there is that GitHub has so much more to offer than what we realize from the outside looking in. We're used to developers using it or students using it to use or to source code their actual or version control their source code, right? So we're used to them using it for development projects. What we're not used to is the HR team using it for documentation. What we're not used to is using it to give all of our managers a view of work in progress. What we're not used to is making the work that we're working on available to the rest of our organization in case they have something they can chip in. And then we're also giving them a guide on how to do that. And that's something that really opened my eyes when I was at GitHub to the capabilities that this platform has. I'll take it even as far as telling you that to request time off, if you're a GitHub employee, you use GitHub. And that's kind of weird, right? You're probably used to going through a system like JustWorks or some sort of HR management tool to request your time off. For us, or for them at GitHub, not us anymore, we would open issues to request our time off. And what was really cool about it is it wasn't just an issue. When we opened that, an entire series of automation would kick off and add that time off information to Google Calendars, to HR spreadsheets. It would put it in wherever the visibility was needed, and the employee had to do nothing other than open an issue. It was really cool. So what we're hoping to do is expand your horizon on what GitHub has to offer you. Some of you might be developers, some of you might not be developers. I hope there's more non-developers than developers in this session, because I think you're going to get a lot of insight on how you can enable your developers. So hopefully we can teach you a thing or two. Prior to GitHub, I traveled all over doing like DevOps consulting. And prior to that, I worked at a college. And prior to that, I did like networking stuff. So I've been all around the block. And my most current stint is here at INE. And what's really cool is I get to bring all of that expertise to the table and talk about a tool that I just truly firmly believe in. And that's the big thing is I could sit on any high horse from a third party that said, hey, will you promote our tool? That is the exact opposite of what's happening here. This bootcamp, although is about GitHub, like this isn't a sponsored thing from GitHub or anything. We at INE saw the power of GitHub and we couldn't help but share it with you. So it's just something that we really believe in and believe can make your workflows a little better. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll kick it over to Brooks if you want to throw a little bit of your background out, and then we'll
Oh,
move
yeah.
on. Have some fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been in INE coming up on 1 year as an instructor here for AWS. Prior to coming here, I was at AWS, the mighty AWS, where I taught all sorts of facets of cloud. And I can tell you that, the things that Matt just talked about, the collaboration, looking back, there were situations where we really should have been using GitHub. One of the most, I don't know if you've ever run into this sort of situation, Matt, where, you're having teams collaborate just on documents, but these are big, big, big documents. And there was a real push on inside about getting rid of some certain types of language inside our public facing documentation, or at that time, AWS's public facing documentation. The challenge was, Matt, was that you're talking about, a document that could have typically hundreds of pages in it, making sure that when it goes to legal can see just what changed when you're passing around Word documents. Wow, that was a real challenge.
Absolutely.
That was, dude, I mean, and the solution was right at our fingertips the whole time with things like GitHub. So I think that's really cool. And by the way, I hope y'all heard the thing that Matt said there about requesting time. That's the flexibility of this tool, that even things like that, and it becomes such a great single source of truth for what's out there. So anyway, yes, I was at AWS. I was there for several years. Prior to that, spent many, many, many years working within the national defense architecture, particularly for the DoD, the different branches of service, implementing cloud architectures. And then, of course, back before that as a software developer, still a software developer today. Matt and I have great conversations about Go and Rust, actually fighting at one another about which one's better. So
True, Go is the better language.
Yeah,
so.
I'll straighten you out, man. Don't worry, we'll get you straightened out. So that's my background right there. But I can tell you, truly, this tool is one of the most overlooked, underutilized things that you have advantage to you. And the thing about it is, the sucker is free, absolutely free to individual users. There's some higher levels that Matt will teach us about, but it's free for the using. So we really do need to take advantage of it. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Brooks.
Yeah, man.
So we'd like to know a little about you, and we know that you guys can't jump on the mic or do any kind of screen sharing, but I see one of you has posted in chat. It looks like VJ says that he works as a network engineer, no
Right.
prior GitHub experience. I would love to hear about some of the rest of you guys that are in attendance. You go ahead and post that in chat. Tell us, a little bit about you. And what we're really curious about is, one, like your GitHub experience. Like, that's super helpful just to know, like, if you've messed with the platform, under what capacity you've played with the tool, whatever that might be. But the most important piece is, tell us about a collaboration challenge that either you currently face or have faced in the past. And I want to prompt you a little bit. Consider all the possibilities of collaboration. There's collaboration in your immediate team. Brooks and I have to work together every day. Don't tell anybody, but we have to. And that means that we have to communicate, or at least our work is better when we do. So we have that inner team, or that intra team collaboration, but we also have to work with the production team. Don't tell them, but we're forced to, again. And that's inter team. So how do we help other teams collaborate with us? And then on occasion, we might have to work with other organizations. And you're probably in one of these buckets many times throughout your career. So I'm curious to know, like, what are some of those challenges that maybe you faced? And we'll give you like 30 seconds to type them out.
Yeah, just a little short blurb. Absolutely.
Cool. So it looks like Baron says that he's also a network engineer working on DevOps and Ansible. High five. What up? I love Ansible. That is my configuration management utility of choice. Absolute favorite tool. That's how I got my DevOps start. And you're just now learning about Git and GitHub. We are going to rock your world. I think that you're going to leave the next 3 days. Not only are we going to show you how to version control all your Ansible playbooks, we're not going to dive into Ansible specifically, but all of the concepts are going to apply. You're also going to learn how to pipeline those. I've done some really cool stuff with Ansible and GitHub Actions, where I used GitHub Actions to take the playbook files and provision the infrastructure and just automate all these pipelines. And we're going to talk about that pipeline automation. We're going to do a little bit for the quote unquote developer, And then it's mostly going to be around like how you can apply this to things that aren't exactly dev or DevOps related, but much more like people management related. All of this stuff is going to apply. And I think you're going to walk away feeling real good, real good. Cool. So Keith says demystifying concepts of repositories, branches, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're in good hands. That's a horse that we will be sure to tenderize thoroughly as we go through this boot camp. Another network engineer. Let's see. No prior experience. Okay. I don't know how it might help with Cisco DevNet, but it might. What I can tell you is that any type of note taking you're ever going to do, GitHub is a wonderful, wonderful place for that. And on that token, all of the files that we work on are going to be shared with you through GitHub. So that's the super cool, like magical review. I know a lot of you are probably going to want a copy of the bootcamp itself, which again, just check INE in a couple of weeks. The editing team, the production team, they're going to be awesome. They're going to put that up there. But maybe you want to leave something on Friday or leave with something on Friday. We got you covered. All of you will know exactly how to interact with the repository that we use through this bootcamp, and you're going to get to take a copy of it with you, and that's going to be super cool.
Absolutely.
You're going to be all set. So if we go fast, right? If we go fast, and if you feel like you skipped something and you really want us to share those files and those notes, just know it's coming. You're going to get absolutely everything. And you might even have visibility on all of our commit history along the way too. That'll be cool. And we'll talk about that.
And one thing I want to add in there real quick, Matt, because I'm looking at Matt and Brian, some of the stuff they posted into the chat. One of the best things about having Matt here to take us through this is the fact that if you've got a little bit of experience, you may have some events like where you go, because I've been doing that work where I go, oh, was doing that wrong, or there was a better approach to it. For example, are we going to talk about issues, Matt, in this particular boot camp?
I might have an issue with issues that we'll discuss. Yeah.
Oh, see, and the proper use of issues, really, I could not believe I had missed something that was right in front of me as an absolutely game-changing tool in terms of improving the flow of work, improving the flow of communication. It really does change the game. Also, when it incorporates with things like the board, which I think we're going to talk about that too, aren't we, Matt?
About what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The board.
Oh,
setting up
absolutely.
A board. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So
we are going to do a quite the deep dive into a lot of the surface level features. So
so as you guys are going through this, not only is it a learning experience, but for those of you who have a little bit of experience, I would open your mind to the possibility that maybe we're doing it wrong, because I know I have been, and Matt can show us the right way.
Looks like we have a question. How does GitHub provide us all of this? Is some of it free? Yeah. So there is no catch. Like, that's the craziest thing. And I'll dive into that in the next section. So just hold that question for a second. Let me set these expectations. And that's actually what we're going to start with, because I totally agree with you.
Such a great question.
So great.
Yep.
If there's no catch, what's the catch, Matt? And the
catch
is there's got to be. Catch. Like, that's the craziest thing about it. Again, I'm going to get overly excited because I'm just passionate about this tool because of that right there. The fact that there's no catch.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense that this is free.
Right. So here's the expectations for the bootcamp. Let's set a couple things up. First and foremost, we are going to hound on GitHub. It is going to be the focus of the next 3 days. Most of the stuff we talk about, branch strategies, issues, version control, collaboration, it does apply to other platforms, right? Other platforms are like Bitbucket and GitLab. This isn't to say that they don't solve this problem either, right? This is just to say that this is Matt's tool of choice to solve this problem. Right. Feel free to use your tool of choice. A lot of what we're going to talk about will transfer, okay? So if your company uses GitLab, don't think, oh, shucks, I'm not going to get anything from this. Same principle. Right? It's just like Azure and AWS. They all offer kind of the same thing. Same thing here, just a different name, just different company, different tool. Okay. Yep. The next expectation is if you're looking for a specific recipe on how to solve some very niche problem, I apologize ahead of time. You are in the wrong place. We are going to talk about leveraging this tool largely in the sense of collaboration and automating some of that collaboration. We're not going to talk about how this tool fits into the DevOps pipeline in depth. We're not going to talk about how GitHub provides you with this super rich history that allows you to roll back bugs that made it into production in depth. We'll touch on it, but you're not going to leave with how to solve my specific problem. You're going to leave with how to start thinking about using this tool to solve your problem. Second to that, if you're a developer, sorry, we're not going to build an application and we're not going to be writing any code. We might do a little bit of that, but
cool.
The focal point is not that.
Right.
Does it help you understand Tanzu Kubernetes? It's going to help you understand keeping the version control for your manifests in order.
Yep.
It's going to help you understand working with other DevOps engineers to write those manifests. You're going to be able to do code reviews on those manifests. Again, it's going to help you understand the collaboration part behind it. Are you going to learn anything about Kubernetes in this? Nope, not at all.
Nope.
But it's going to help you do Kubernetes better.
Absolutely. And especially, you know, with those manifests, Matt, that is such a big deal because the collaboration with a worldwide team, that's, you know, the sort of stuff that we had at AWS, you can easily and quickly share. You can look at the differences and you can make suggestions. It's just fantastic. Vijay, I think you'll really enjoy it and learn a lot. Again, we're not going to be diving into Tanzu Kubernetes, obviously, but you will have the foundation of going, I see a better way.
Exactly. There's a lot of things you would get from GitHub that we'll talk about along the way, like the security features can help with those manifests. Like you may have been in a situation, you wouldn't be unique if you were, where a sensitive API key or password kind of got stored in a file somewhere.
Ouch.
I know someone that could be guilty of that at some point. You know, GitHub helps with that type of stuff. So
yeah, it does.
So those are the major expectations. The last one that I want to hit on is that this is a 100% participation kind of thing. Okay, we're gonna build in some time for you to be able to do some of the stuff that we're working on, and because of that, there are a couple prerequisites that come along with this. One, I'm assuming is a bad assumption, but I'm assuming you got a web browser. You have access to Chrome, Safari, Brave. You should probably be using Brave, personal opinion, whatever it might be. You have access to a web browser, and here's the catch: you're on a network that can reach github.com. Okay, so if you're VPN through work, you can't get to the GitHub website, you're gonna have a bad time. Get that fixed. Let's make sure you can get to github.com. Outside of that, those are your only prerequisites. I don't need you to have a bunch of other tools installed. Truth be told, you don't even need to have Git installed. Okay, so we're going to do all of this inside of the web interface, which is going to drive some of you nuts if you're terminal freaks. Again, this guy, but that's okay. Again, we're driving home different concepts. All right, the last thing is, if I go too quick because I get crazy excited, in chat, say, Matt, you're crazy, slow down, you've had too much coffee, let Brooks talk, we don't like you anymore. Whatever you need to say, throw that out there so I know to slow down. Okay.
Oh yeah, because I talk slow. Absolutely, man.
Exactly. So are you going to show how to do stuff with both Windows and Mac respective? Just one plot twist, I'm going to use Linux. So
gotcha, Keith.
Everything I do is going to be on Linux, and I can give you, from the stuff we're going to cover, it does not matter what operating system you use. Truth be told, if you want to be fancy, go grab GitHub Mobile and do all this from your phone, because you can do that too. So the operating system is not a factor, right? It's all on github.com. So it's going to be all through your web browser. So your operating system doesn't come into play at all for this. But that being said, if you wanted to do certain things locally, you could use Windows, you could use Mac, you could use Linux. I use all three depending on what I'm doing in my daily life. And I use GitHub for pretty much virtually everything all the time. And hopefully you'll see why along the way. So Don't feel like I'm on a Mac, I can't participate. Don't feel like, oh, I'm a Linux user, I can't participate. Again, if you have a web browser, you are good to go. And it's that simple. Good questions, though. I appreciate them. And you're thinking in the right position here. What's really cool, though, before we jump too far, when we get to this GitHub Actions section, you'll learn that GitHub actually supports all of these operating systems for its automation, right? So some of you might be deploying infrastructure on Mac, or that is Mac-based infrastructure. Others might be using Linux-based infrastructure. Some of you might be writing applications for all these different operating systems, and GitHub is built to handle all of that. So I know when Brooks and I collaborate, he often uses a Mac and I use my Windows machine, and we make commits to each other. And you'll see throughout the interactions we have in this boot camp, it might be helpful for you to know this just based on this question. I'm going to be on a Linux machine and Brooks is using his Mac. So as you see us interact with one another, that's kind of the ecosystem that we're working within. And you'll see that he can collaborate with me just fine through this. Are you going to have any breaks? No, we are driving a tight ship. We will never, ever take a break. So
no, we will be having breaks at the
enjoy.
top. Yeah, we'll be having breaks at the top of the hierarchy. Sorry, that was on me, everyone. My fault.
No, always breaks.
Yeah,
always breaks.
We will be having breaks, but what we'll be doing is either at the top of the hour or just whatever's opportune, we'll be doing in there. So yeah, expect those, everyone.
Yep, absolutely. We got to step away from these lights a little bit as the time goes on. It gets a little warm.
Oh yeah.
All right. So now, in order to request a break, though, you're going to need to submit an issue. That's how it's going to work for breaks. Okay, so we're going to start. I'm going to throw up a quick poll, right? Before we really dive into this, I have just a couple true false questions for you guys that I kind of just want everybody's, again, participation on. So let's take a look at this statement. GitHub provides developers a place to store project source code. If you think that's true, go ahead and hit true. If you think it's false or you're unsure, go ahead and hit false. And as soon as yeah, that's great. Awesome. We got 12. How many other people? Oh, we got 29 people. Nobody disagrees that this is true, huh? Oh, some people, we got maybe unsure. Okay. We're going to call it unsure rather than false, right? Because that's important too. Cool. So you're right, right? This is how GitHub is known. It's known as this tool used for, here, I'll share these. Everybody can see the results. This is known for hosting billions, if not trillions of lines of source code, right, from developers. And that was its primary purpose when it was first developed. It is now not the case thanks to things like DevOps, right? The push for DevOps said, we need our tooling to do much more than just be a simple version control interface. Let's jump to the next one and take a look at what that has to say. I'll launch this poll for you. GitHub users need extensive command line knowledge. This is something I hear quite a bit. So let's see what people think. I wouldn't be surprised. Yep. There we go. Making a little more sense. Exactly. Right. There's this idea that this is true, but some of you might have thought this before this question came up. But if you tuned in just a tad while we were talking throughout this intro, I said we're not going to use the command line at all. We're going to go all through that web interface, right? So that's the awesome thing. Think about this when you're trying to talk to your teams. Let's say you have your production team. Okay, we love them. They're not developers, and that's okay. So GitHub is foreign. It's a foreign tool. It's as foreign to them as Adobe Premiere Pro is to me. Okay. They might, your HR people, same situation, right? They might be intimidated to jump into a tool like this because the assumption is that they're going to be in a terminal using all these command line commands to get any work done, and they don't want to star in the next hacker movie, which they should, because good movie. However, this is a common misconception. So I'm glad that A lot of you seem to have picked up on that or knew that prior. So here's the next one. We're going to do this for an hour. Okay, so get comfy. Placing code on GitHub means my project is open source. Let's see where we land with this one.
That's a big one right there, because there's a lot of managers, if you go to and say, hey, can we put this on GitHub to try to do collaboration? They're real quick, if they've been misinformed or if they don't understand, are going to say, wait a minute, anybody in the world can see that.
Exactly. And this is just a judging thing for me, not to judge you, but to just talk about how this is affected. All right. So this one is a little more split. Okay. And this is a very common misconception, right? And there's a reason for it. You'll see when we get to the GitHub webpage, it prides itself on being the home of open source projects. Right. So you see that, and it's really easy to immediately think that anything I put on GitHub automatically becomes open source. The actual answer to this is that that's not true at all.
Not at all.
You can have completely proprietary stuff on GitHub, and you can keep it 100% private to your organization. Why does this matter? Well, think of the context we're talking about GitHub in. Using it for non-code things like your hiring policies, your job descriptions, right? If let's say your team is hiring and you post the job roles, responsibilities, all that in a file on GitHub that everybody in your organization can see. You've now made it easy for all of your employees to know exactly what the company is looking for. And somebody can jump in and say, hey, you said that you want a DevOps engineer, but you're expecting them to have 35 years of Ansible experience. That's impossible. Let me just edit this and fix this for you to something that's more realistic, right? And these things can happen. And that has nothing to do with open source versus closed source, right? So that's going to stay 100% proprietary to your company. It's not a code project by any means. And that's a huge misconception that hopefully we can clear up for you.
And Matt, if I can just jump in here real quick, that has been a major sore point for me, working with different companies, particularly the HR departments, who've been doing exactly what you said. They put together these descriptions for like a DevOps engineer for AWS. I look at what they've posted and it makes no sense whatsoever. It's not their fault. Okay. They're in HR. They're not, they don't particularly care to know about AWS, how long it's been around. So when somebody says, and I've seen this before, somebody said, must have 20 years of AWS experience. So I was like, okay, that's neat. I know of no human being on the planet, including Andy Jassy, who helped lead the whole thing, who's got that much experience. So when you get into a collaborative environment, and this is why we call this GitHub for everyone, this could be the place where HR puts the rec out and reaches out to everyone and says, hey, does this make sense? And you can collaborate real time and really put together a tight document. And it's so easy to do. It's actually to the point of, I think, Matt, maybe you can agree or disagree with this, where it's almost to the point of it was a mistake not to use it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, but I, again, super passionate about GitHub itself. And honestly, that statement of it's a mistake not to use it is not a GitHub specific statement. It is a version control kind of specific statement. So you should be using something like GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub. There's others out there. Those are just the major 3 players in the space. Your teams are going to benefit exponentially from the ability to collaborate on stuff like that. It's a super easy fix, right? And let's face it, maybe that person that drafted that job requirement for 20 years of AWS experience, maybe they meant to say 2, and they accidentally bumped a 0 on the keyboard. The fact that you had 100 pairs of eyes on it means that you caught that before it went out, and it took all of 5 seconds to fix, which you'll see. It'll be awesome. All right. On to the next one. It is difficult to navigate the GitHub website. Now, if you've never been, we can go with true on this one. If you've never been, we can go with true. Here's the kicker behind this question: is it's kind of a gotcha, in that the GitHub website. So GitHub, fun fact, GitHub builds GitHub using GitHub. So what I mean by that is all of the source code for GitHub is on GitHub. It's closed source, by the way. At least part of it is. So all of the source code for GitHub is on GitHub, which uses GitHub to then deploy GitHub to its cloud environments. Okay. And they're a DevOps product, and there's DevOps all throughout GitHub, which does many, 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 many deploys a day. I'd say on average, probably 50 deploys a day to all sorts of stuff. And that causes this website, the actual web application itself, to change very frequently. One of the best things about being on staff is I got to see all of those changes really early because I had what was called a staff view. So I could see the features come and go, but it also made work really hard sometimes because buttons would move, they would disappear. I would get super cool new features that were useful, and then they'd take them away for some reason. But expect this to be very fluid. Exactly, Gitception. It's going to be fluid. So if you find it hard today, it might not be hard tomorrow. And if you find it easy today, your time's coming. Don't get comfy. Your time's coming. All right, we got just two more, a couple more of these, and then this is really going to help us, and then we'll stop beating this pole horse. Yeah. GitHub helps project managers view work in progress.
I like this question, Matt.
I know you do, Brooks. I know you do.
I like it.
I know. Yeah. That's awesome that everybody agrees on this. Now, my follow-up question would be, do we know how? And I bet that's where some really cool, mind-blowing stuff is going to show up. And we talk about how project managers can view this work in progress, because it's much more than just being able to see what changed or what's in the process of changing. Some through insights. We'll take a look at insights. Mostly through projects. It's kind of a collection of all of it, right? And if you know where and how to look, using tools like insights, projects, pull requests, issues, the whole thing, you'll see, you'll start to form like this entire map in your head about exactly how fast and how on pace a project is, how behind it is, who is doing, taking on what responsibilities for that project. As a project manager, you'll know who to ping in Slack and say, hey, Brooks, I need you to do that review, man. Like it's been sitting there for 2 weeks. What's taking you so long? And Brooks is like, I just, forgot about it. Yeah, I'm human. How about that? And you're like, and then he goes and he checks it and he takes care of it. And as a project manager, instead of chasing Brooks down for 4 days trying to get something done, it was one ping in Slack, and your job is now easy because Brooks went ahead and took care of that really quickly because he had the right tools.
I like the converse argument on that one, dude, where they called me up and then say, hey, why haven't you done that yet? And I can say, did you not go check GitHub?
Exactly.
Did you not go check?
All right, 2 more. GitHub is a tool for development teams. It's another trick question, isn't it? Exactly. Yes, it is a tool for development teams. It's not a tool limited to development teams, though, and that's a huge misconception. This comes every time you look at something on the internet for a course on GitHub, or you're in college or whatever. It really seems like this is only for devs, right? Or maybe DevOps engineers at this point. And honestly, it's just unfair. I would, when I used to travel, I would use GitHub project boards to build my packing list on what I needed to take with me. And I would just slide the cards over as I pack. So I've used this for all sorts of things. And that's when I say firmly believe in it, it's because I've thought of very creative ways to use the platform, and it really helps keep me organized. All right, last one. And then we'll get on to talking about some of these accounts, and we'll get back to that catch. Knowing how to write code is necessary to use GitHub. It's a little bit of a trick question, but not much. I can very easily divide the room with how
I was going to say, you did put some tricky ones together, man. This is tricky.
Yeah. Well, it's graded, so get it right. And
and
then we'll be fine. Cool. Majority of you say false, which is great. Uh-oh, we switched. Yeah, no, we didn't. Okay, sorry. Which is great. Most of you say false. It is not necessary. We have a couple unsures, most likely. I could easily divide the room by saying GitHub has its own language. It's not really a language. It's a markup format for writing awesome documentation. And we're going to spend some time doing it. And it's gonna, at first you might be like, man, why am I doing this? But once you start using it, you're going to realize that you can make documentation that is intuitive and has all the cross-linking you could ever want into it and examples and everything really, really quickly. I've used it so much now that I find it really hard to write Word documents or Google Docs documents. I can't use regular word processors because it takes too long to format them. When if I use Markdown, it's really, really fast for me.
I think I'll go a step beyond that, Matt. I would actually go as far as to say is that I think it's going to become a required skill.
I hope it does.
I hope it does too, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about comparing very large documents, again, something like HR, where they're setting some sort of legal precedence that's going to go throughout the organization, and this is a multi-page dense document, and somebody wants to make a change to it, being able to quickly find that change, Markdown's set up for it perfectly inside things like GitHub. And so then why am I dealing with this giant document with embedded control characters that I can't even see, that when I try to do a diff, is just going to go nuts? So with that said, Markdown, just everybody, it gives you so much more capability. Let me get off the soapbox on that one. It's a skill you need. We'll touch upon it here.
Yeah, we're going to do some cool stuff with it too. So it might seem a little drab at first, but we're going to do some really cool things, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely.
All right, so what is GitHub, right? We've kind of answered this along the way, so I won't beat this horse too much. It is the industry leading tool for source code management, right? And it is becoming or it's trying to become an industry leader in all things collaboration and project management, right? To include the source code that goes along with that. It really wants to be your entire DevOps one-stop shop, and it's working hard to do that. It has a long way to go, and that's okay. That's our space. We constantly iterate, right? GitHub is so important to the world that it is ready for a disaster recovery situation. Fun fact, okay?
Wow, that's true.
GitHub has more source code on it than any other platform, right? So most of the world's open source projects are on GitHub. So much so that GitHub believes in a disaster scenario, they could recover most of the code that is in existence today. They actually purchased, you could look this up, they purchased space in what is called the Arctic Code Vault, right? It's in the Arctic Circle next to the seed bank. You're probably all familiar with the seeds that are stored up there so that we could replant the earth if we needed to. Well, about a year ago, they took a snapshot of all of the public repositories on GitHub. So all of the code in the public repositories, and they stored that on a drive in the Arctic right now, and they update it every now and then, but it's stored and ready to go in case of a disaster recovery scenario where we need to restore a bulk of the world's programs. And that's how critical good version control and actually keeping track of this stuff is. And that's how widely popular this tool is, that there's that much code that we could probably rebuild the world, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yep.
What's really fun is if you had a GitHub account prior to this, you now have a really cool little badge on your GitHub account that says that you're an Arctic Code Vault contributor. So that's super cool. So that's a little about GitHub, right? We're gonna dig more into it with the Arctic shells rapidly melting. Should I be concerned that my strawberry seeds will be lost? Beats me. I mean, the question is, are you 20 or are you 70? Right? If you're 70, you don't care about those seeds, right? If you're 20, strawberry shortcake might be off the plate later on in the future here. So,
oh my gosh, how did we get on that subject so quick?
What, strawberry shortcake? How do you
Yeah.
not get on that subject?
I
That's
don't
the
know,
more
man, but we
important part.
swerved right into it.
All right, so that's the GitHub, right? We need to expand this thing to be much more collaborative in our regular work, because if we're doing that with source code, like, what if we did that with hiring processes? What if we did that with inner team connectivity processes? What if we could recover that in a disaster recovery scenario, right? So that's kind of cool. All right, so let's jump into these GitHub accounts. We're gonna kill this PowerPoint at this point. We're gonna talk about GitHub accounts as a whole. Okay.
Hey, enough of the slides.
So if you've ever been to github.com, you're greeted with this super cool screen. Changes all the time, right? This is just one of those things they do. They give you some really cool stats, and you're prompted to sign up. Okay. I already have an account, so I'm not gonna go ahead and sign up again. And this is kind of a teaching point. One of the things that comes with GitHub accounts is that you shouldn't have 5 of them, right? Ideally, you use the same GitHub account for your personal projects as you do for your work projects. GitHub is like built for that. There are plenty of checks and balances in place that ensure that I can't accidentally like merge the two where they can't see each other or whatever it might be. There's no harm in using the same account for those things. As a matter of fact, like, you can be a part of many groups with the same account. But if we look at some of the pricing, right, this is the gotcha. Going back to that question, look at this. For compare features, right? For an individual account, just a user, a regular you and me, it's free, $0. What do you get? Well, unlimited public storage, which is great. Public means Brooks and I can collaborate with you. Public means somebody across the world can collaborate with you. Maybe the DevOps engineers that you were talking to in Discord want to help you with your Kubernetes manifest, so you send them a link to your public repository, and guess what? They help you. But what if it's work related? Or what if I have a super secret Tony Stark project that I'm working on? Go Iron Man. Well, I can also have private repositories, which means only me or who I allow can see these things. And all of this is free, but this is where the gotcha comes. Look at this. No access to code spaces, right? So what code spaces is I'll show you, it's an online editor, a text editor. You don't need it at all. It's not something you need in order to use GitHub. It also, there's a reason why it's not on free accounts. It doesn't really benefit the individual user. It really benefits the team or the organization or the enterprise. The reason for that is your developers or whoever's working on your stuff would never need to put a local copy on their machine. They could do all of their work on GitHub without ever having a local file on their machine. If you're just you, that's totally fine, right? You're not running away with company secrets unless it's your company, right? So that's one of the advantages, and that's why it's not included. This stuff, this actions minutes, hey, look, you get a little bit less. This is the catch. This is the gotcha. The free account gets 2,000 minutes. The enterprise gets a whole lot more. But look at this. I don't know how well we can see that, so I'll zoom in.
Free for public repos. How about
Free
that?
for public, right? Because GitHub does focus on open source and collaboration, the more stuff you do publicly, the more features you get. That's the catch. For free, you're going to get more stuff to do it publicly. Same thing with packages. You want to store Docker images on GitHub? What? Might not even know you could do that, but you can, right? You want to store Docker images on GitHub or npm packages or some of the other artifacts that you're building? That's great. You get 500 megabytes of storage for free in private repositories. Public, unlimited. It's free. It's great.
Yeah. Can you take a second real quick here? Patrick has a question.
Yep.
And just briefly, because I know we're going to talk more about it later.
Yeah.
What exactly is Actions? What does that do for us?
Actions is an automation tool set that's built into repositories, and they execute over time on virtual machines.
Mhm.
So when it says actions minutes, it genuinely means that. Let's make this, hopefully bring it back to something we all maybe understand a little differently. Is, let's think of an AWS EC2 instance, a virtual machine in the cloud, right? We turn on that virtual machine and we start paying for it by the minute, right? For every minute the virtual machine is on, we get a little bitty charge. GitHub Actions is the same thing. For every minute, what's called a workflow, which we'll dive into, for every minute that workflow runs, it's accumulating those minutes. So if you hit more than 2,000 minutes, you won't be able to trigger another workflow for that repository. What's crazy is this is a repository by repository basis. Okay, so like, let's say you had one private repository. Well, you get 2,000 of these action minutes before you have to pay for them. There's the catch, right? Like, you could buy more minutes. You could also just create a second private repository and get 2,000 more minutes, or a third private repository, and now you have 6,000 minutes.
Mhm.
And if you're slick, you can kind of link all those things together and have unlimited private repository minutes if you did some finagling. And I say that, and I don't know if it's against the terms of service. I haven't dug into it that much. I do know that I've done that for like a lot of proof of concept things for GitHub themselves, and nobody's ever like scolded me for that. So unlimited though for public. So this is just quite literally how long your automation process takes.
And to kind of put a button on it for you, Patrick, when we're talking, and for everyone who's watching about what Actions is, one of the things I've used Actions for personally is I like to use a framework called Pulumi to create AWS architecture. And basically you write it in Python. And then what I can do is I can push that code up to GitHub, and then via GitHub Actions, that is the compute time, it actually reads my code. It will create my architecture for me in AWS. And there's a lot of examples of things like that, for, particularly with containerization, deploying containers, the time that it takes for their servers to kind of crunch what you've done and put it out there. Those are those minutes that Matt was just showing us. And I think it kind of, for me personally, Matt, it's one of those moments where my jaw drops a little bit more because I realized that was free. I did that at no cost whatsoever. Flipping ever.
If you went to go hook up Azure pipelines, you're paying for that.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
And
Like,
AWS, y'all, you better
so
buckle up.
Nuts that it's free, as long as you're willing to be public. Like that's like, okay, how many of us have learning experiences when we're trying to figure these things out? Like, just set that stuff up for free in a public repository. Like, it doesn't look bad on you if you learned something, right? Like, that's why you're here. Like, you're not ashamed to be in this boot camp, maybe because you're hanging out with Brooks, but for the most part, like, like, you're here, so you embrace learning. So why not make that public and get it done for free? And it's not free like Google offers you. Here's $300 in credit. No, it's just free. Like, I can't unfree it. It's that free.
Well, not to mention this whole thing that you and I have talked about so much when we talk about this engineering stuff that we're working towards. It's the idea that when you're sitting in anything, including our videos where we're teaching you something, use GitHub. Create yourself a little repo based on what you're learning and put your notes in there, because of two reasons. One, obviously it's going to be your notes, but two, when you get to that job where you need to remember, wait a minute, Matt taught me how to do that in GitHub. You can just go to your GitHub repo and look at your notes right there.
Exactly.
And this is, again, why I'm talking about Markdown is such a big deal, because GitHub will render your Markdown very beautifully. So you've always got that stuff available. And as bonus points, when you go into that job interview, and back me up on this one, Matt, when you go into that job interview, like we were talking about Kubernetes, and they say to you, how would you do that? Nothing, I'm going to pound the desk. Nothing will win the day like you going, well, actually, if you want to, let's take a look at my GitHub repo.
Bingo.
I've actually got some code like that. You've just won the interview.
Exactly. And then
won it.
When you start, you might run into a problem. You're like, man, didn't Brooks teach me how to do that with a script in that course? Like, you have that script, just take it to work with you, right? It's a toolbox. So again, what's the catch? Let's go back to that. We'll circle back to that. Well, if it's public, it means everybody can see it. That's the catch. What does GitHub get from this? More code to put into the Arctic code vault. There's also this thing that we're not going to dive too much into detail. It's called GitHub Copilot. It's a programming bot that you can tie into like Visual Studio Code, and it uses AI to suggest code snippets for you, right? You can actually write a whole lot of code without ever writing code. The data in the code used to train Copilot comes from public repositories. So what does GitHub get from that? They get to make their stuff better because they can analyze the things that are taking place in the community, right? So that's the catch. GitHub gets to use your public stuff to make GitHub better for your public stuff. It's like, that's the catch. So the other catch is there's tiers, right? You see 0, 40, T10. This isn't exactly accurate. And again, this changes all the time, so we're not going to harp on the price. But what you do need to know is that this is for free. But what if I want some of these things to exist? Let's see if I can find one. Like, what if I wanted required reviews on a private repository and I'm an individual user? I can sign up for something called GitHub Pro, and it's not listed here, but it does exist, I promise. If for a whopping $4 a month, so what, a third, maybe a quarter of the cost of Netflix at this point, you can enable a lot of these features in an unlimited fashion for your private repositories. Okay. So like, that's what you get out of the upgrade, is all the stuff you can do in public repositories, like you get in the private ones. You're also not going to get support, like, but that's okay. You're not going to need it. That support is for like the enterprise servers and stuff like that. It's not for .com. So GitHub has like a lot of different things, like product SKUs, right? So there's .com, which we all use, but there's also enterprise server, which if you're an enterprise admin, maybe you care about, but for this bootcamp, we're not going to dig into the enterprise side all that much. So then there's team, which is also called organization. They go back and forth between these terms. It looks like it's team today. This is where you want to have like a core group of people you want to work with. So I'll give you an example. I have a small group of people that I typically work on projects with. We try to launch startup ideas on a regular basis, and we use a team or an organization to do that. So all the repositories for our stuff exist inside of this team realm. And then I use my individual account to interact with the team. Okay. And I'll show you what that looks like once I log in. I'll show you an organization that I'm a part of, and I'll show you how we can all see that stuff. And I might even, I don't know if I can create another one. The limit is if you don't want to pay for organizations. So here's the other thing. It says team is $40, but it's not. Like, it is, but it isn't. Like, you can create a free organization that kind of inherits all this free stuff that we have. Oh, sorry. From this column of free stuff here, it kind of inherits that. But as a team, if you want to upgrade your team to do more intense private kind of collaboration, then you can do that for a fee. There is no such thing as a free tier on the enterprise. Okay. So that's the catch, is there's these free tiers that are offered that offer you pretty much all of the functionality on public repositories. There is a small fee for the quote unquote pro versions of those account types that give you the access to the advanced stuff on private repositories. And then there's this outlier that's enterprise, which, you know, that's probably a decision that's a little higher up on the chain than us, but that allows you to run GitHub on-prem, right? So you're in that situation, maybe you're working with the DoD, finance, health, something highly regulatory that says we can't use a cloud product. Well, we can get you GitHub on premise. You just need enterprise to do it. So we're not going to harp on that, but that's a huge thing about the account differences in the account types. So I'm going to log in really quick to my account for you guys. And look, this is my username, and I'm perfectly okay with you having that. Doesn't hurt me. It's public. You guys should absolutely go look at some of the repositories that I have. Excuse me, I have to authenticate, which we're going to talk about, which is why I'm logging in. So I'm going to use my two-factor authentication code. If you steal this, it's okay. It's about to expire in a whopping 10 seconds. And here we go. Okay. So same screen, but if I come over to my profile, you can see I have a user account. It's no different than what you would have when you first sign up. This is the Arctic Code Vault contributor stuff, which is really cool. But at quick glance, so this is the individual user account, right? This is a personal account, not an organization account. Okay.
Let me ask you about that, Matt, real quick, because I think this is interesting. This is your personal account.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is the exact same account that you use to interact with me all the time inside the INE space or anything else that we're working on, correct?
Absolutely. And yep, and I'll show you exactly that. So that's a great question, actually. I only have this account. This is my only GitHub account, period. I use this for learning. I use this for work. I use this for personal projects. I use this for notes. Like I genuinely use this for everything.
Well, the reason I ask is, and I think it's probably been about 2 years ago, I worked with an organization up in the Boston area. They actually had separate logins. You know, like when you came to work, they had their work-based GitHub account. And I remember looking at that thinking, I think that's a bit inefficient. I think that may not need to be the case.
It is 100% in contradiction with what GitHub recommends as the best practice. So the best practice recommended by GitHub is you just use one account. It's easier for them to gather the right metrics to help the community. If you're doing that, it makes it easier on you. You don't have to manage different logins. Like I just had to two-factor my way in. That's one security feature. There's like, what if I had access tokens, another security feature, which we're going to dive into in a second, for all these different accounts, and I forgot to roll my tokens or whatever it might be. It's just better for me and better for GitHub if I have that one account. It's also better for your organization because like INE, for example, has an organization in GitHub. They didn't create me a brand new INE GitHub account. They said, what is your GitHub handle? And we invited me into the organization as me, okay? So what's really cool about this at first glance, right? Public, first and foremost, 143 repositories. Now, if you think that I have 143 software development projects that I've worked on and deployed, you'd be sorely mistaken, okay? Public, 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 public. Wait a minute, we see a theme. The guy with 143 repositories that spends some time at GitHub as an employee has a lot of public repositories. Okay, but it's not limited to that. If we look through here, look, private template, right? These are different repository types, which we're going to jump into. So don't get hung up on that right now. Don't try to steal my Harry Potter voice React app either. So there's that. I'm kidding. You can't steal it. I don't think. If it's public, it's open source.
And you can get it.
Yeah. And it's not even a remotely complete project. I was teaching somebody how to do some React stuff. So again, collaboration, right? I do a lot of mentoring with people that are like going through like web development boot camps. And oftentimes I will create a repository and we will collaborate in my repository, hence the Harry Potter React voice app thingy. So this is my profile. It's just like anything else social. Like I can have followers so people can follow the work that I do. I can follow other people. I can have like these are Docker images. This is an NPM package, whatever it might be. I can have all these things and they're all associated with me to a degree. If I come down here though, we see organizations. And if we go and we click on this one, this is an organization that myself and these other people are part of. Okay, so this is an organization account. And we can see that this is private, and this is private, and this is private, and this is public, or whatever it might be. And this is at the organization level. This is where we can do fancy things like manage teams, right? So I can create a new team if I wanted to. I could come in here and I give it its name, its visibility. I can create secret teams. I can't do these things as an individual. It doesn't make sense for me to create a secret team in my namespace. So that's the big difference between organizations and users, is you get like this namespace where you can do people management, right? So I can say, hey, like, here are all the people in this, right? And what their permissions are and who and what they can see, okay? So we're gonna pop out of here and we'll go back to my personal account. So now we're back to the personal account and you'll see I don't have the ability to manage people. I just don't, because I don't need to. This is my individual account. So if we look at INE, I hope we can look at INE. I think we can look at INE. We just won't click into anything. We can see, here's this. We can typically see who's a part of it, right? We see there's 18 different teams, and that's because INE is an organization account. And it also contains stuff like this. If you were to go to the URL github.com/internetwork-expert, you would land on like a public splash page that you probably wouldn't even see that this exists. You would never know that this repository is real because it's listed as private. Same thing with my individual user account. If you go to github.com/MattDavis0351, I'll even copy this for you and I'll put it in chat just in case anybody wants to. You're not going to see any of the private repositories I have. And why is that? Well, it's because that's one of the security features, is I can decide the visibility, both at the organization level and at the user level. I give more control at the organization level. I can set up, when I create my teams, I can say, hey, Brooks is just a member, or he's an admin, or he's an owner, or he's a maintainer. And all of these give different levels of read-write permissions. Okay. So if you want to go there, you can. Another quick thing on your profile is you get this really cool contribution graph. I think it's safe to say I use GitHub just a little bit. There's been a lot of contributions in the last year, in 2022 already. I think it might go for the whole year, but whatever. And I can see where those contributions are going, what they're coming from. I can even scroll down and see my contribution history. Okay, so let's pause for 2 seconds and think about this from that project manager point of view. I need to know if Brooks has been working on something. Well, what can I do? I can just go look at his profile. I can scroll down and I can see, oh, Brooks created 4 repositories. Matt created 4 repositories, right? Oh, look, there's open pull requests. Not only did this person open 3 of them in 2 different repositories, I can quickly see their status. 2 of them have been merged. 1 of them is currently open. Well, what's a pull request? You got to wait a little later for that.
Yep.
But immediately on just me, I have very quick, like a 30,000 foot view on what my activity looks like. There's something missing here though that we're going to work on. It's going to be kind of cool.
Let me jump in here with a question real quick, Matt.
Go ahead, man. I'd love you.
Before we go to break. So if I create a GitHub account and I create a public repo, boom, it's out there for everybody to see. What about if a situation comes up? Well, let's say I want to show off, let's say I've been working on my skills with Rust. And so I want to show off some Rust code. Can I take a private repo and move it to public?